Chapter 9, Lizard. Saria, no Bleach this week? DMNU Golden Week. Zas, Halibel. Someone is obviously going to step in against her for Tushiro. Who? Sa and Saria look at each other, Lisa from the Vizards. Tori, no. I want Rose to do it. Zas, so, who won the polls this time? Saria, it was an extremely close one this time. Between Stark and Halibel, only one vote difference. Tori, so, who won? The game of tag between Ichigo, Jin, Zomori, and Baragon's fraction, minus Coolhorn, had finally started up again. This time though, Baragon and Chusen found themselves joined by Aizen, Halibel, Ulquiorra, and Sayelaporo. The topic of discussion, what was to be done in regards to Kurosaki Ichigo. Halibel was perfectly fine with being Ichigo's mommy, and was fine with correcting the child if he continued to refer to Aizen as daddy if he didn't approve. Sayel wanted to remove Ichigo back to the lab and see if these new views would affect his power. Ulquiorra believed the child needed to be severely reprimanded and his actions corrected. Neither Halibel nor Aizen were his mother and or father, and he needed to realize that. Chusen believed that Ulquiorra for once needed to calm down, and that Halibel was an excellent choice to watch over raise Ichigo. She would make the boy a strong and loyal ally. Baragon offered to have Ichigo raised as one of his fraction. None of them expected Aizen's final decision to be what it was. It works out well for us if Ichigo does believe that this is his family, even better if we make it true, Aizen told the group as he watched the toddler run and dodge around Jijo and Avirama. So from this day forward, if Halibel agrees to this, she is now Ichigo's adoptive mother, and I shall be his adoptive father. As soon as his age seems to reach 5, he will begin training in Kido with Chusen to regain his Zanbakuto. That should better his general control of his Reiatsu, and this adoption should ensure his loyalty to me and our cause. I will still expect for each Espada to take turns watching him, and moreover, attempt to teach Ichigo something, such as literature, languages, swordsmanship, or etiquette so that we can ensure a well-rounded upbringing. Any questions? Ulquiorra came very close to running to find Grimjo and telling him of what had just transpired. That Kurosaki Ichigo had just been adopted by Aizen and a superior Espada and was to be raised to most likely become their superior. The volatile Sexter would probably act as though he had just swallowed a lemon and then go running off to do away with Kurosaki. Moreover, Grimjo would then be the one in trouble, and Ulquiorra would have gotten rid of 2 highly annoying birds with 1 stone. But on the other hand, it wasn't every day that one got to raise their own future superiors, and impress upon them what they believed was important. He could change Kurosaki into something that suited him a lot more than Jin or Chusen did, and he already knew that with the correct training, the boy would become very powerful. Chusen listened faintly as the child ran through Poe's legs, Jin following afterwards, Avirama and Jijo slamming into the guy's legs as Zomori stopped short and the trio collapsed backwards, Ichigo managing to get out of the way, Jin acting as the impromptu cushion for this mess as he laughed and forgot to get out of the way himself. The result, Poe was sitting on Jin who was screaming for help, Avirama and Jijo were sitting in Poe's lap, and Ichigo had grabbed Jin's hand and tried, ineffectually, to free the man. Chusen wondered if it would be best to teach the child offensive Kido like White Lightning or Shot of Red Fire first, or if he should start with Binding Kido. Sayel internally groaned. He already knew he would be expected to teach in the fields of science and computers, and that Aizen would expect the lessons to be milder things like physics and chemistry, not dissection. Baragon simply shrugged. He really didn't feel as though this affected him. So, things being as they are now, I believe Ichigo would probably like to finish this game, then he should spend the rest of today with Halibel. Turning to the female Espada, Aizen gave her an imploring look. Try to prevent him from starting any more food fights, setting off any traps, or causing mental breakdowns. With a loud howl, Poe finally jumped off of Jin. Zomori had finally gotten involved and kicked the fraction on the small of his back. Jijo and Avirama, who had just scrambled off of the other fraction, were now the new cushions for Poe. Their colorful language earned them a private session with Halibel a few seconds later. Halibel smiled behind her collar as she walked down the hall, Ichigo running around her excitedly. She almost felt like joining him in his frolicking. He was officially hers, by law as it stood in Hueco Mundo and Las Noches. The son of her and Aizen. Mommy, Mommy! Look! Ichigo held up a tiny hand that held a lizard that he had apparently just caught. It's very nice, Ichigo-kun, Halibel replied as she gazed down at the tiny lizard. What's very nice, Halibel-sama? Myra Rose asked as she appeared. Ichigo, having received such a positive response from his mommy over the lizard, immediately rushed over to Myra Rose and showed her the lizard. Myra Rose grinned at the sight of the lizard in the child's hand and quickly patted Ichigo's head before turning her attention back to Halibel. So, is Kurosaki with us today? Is who with us today? Sunday through Sunday had just appeared and queried a question of her own, before uttering a quick "oh" when Ichigo ran over to her to show her the captured lizard as well. Halibel felt herself freeze over Myra Rose's question. So, the kid is with us today? Apache asked as she appeared next to Sunday through Sunday. A moment later, she caught sight of the lizard. Ow you! Apache screamed as she turned heel and fled the scene. Myra Rose stared after her for a second in shock before immediately asking Ichigo to give her the lizard, and then charged after Apache with the lizard raised high over her head. Ichigo giggled at the sight of Myra Rose chasing Apache with the lizard. Only Sunday through Sunday noticed Halibel's sudden confusion and heard her wonder aloud, is his name really Kurosaki anymore? So, how are we going to determine if Kurosaki has really been turned into a baby or not? Renji demanded. It had been a few days, and they had finally decided to touch on the issue of was the ice cream-covered toddler we saw in Last Notches really Kurosaki Ichigo, and if it was, what are we going to do? Rukia had finally recovered enough to leave bed unaided, and Isshin was also present. We need to get back there, back to Last Notches, and get a better look at the kid, Scan his Reiatsu, asked some questions, Ishida declared from across the table. The only good news out of this that I can see is that it is highly unlikely that Kurosaki-kun is being tortured or will come out with any sort of traumatizing experience. I am quite sure that Aizen would never harm a child that isn't a threat to him, Urahara pointed out. Yoruichi sighed though. Just the fact that if that was indeed Ichigo, and he was in the kitchen, sitting in ice cream tells me that he isn't being harmed. If anything, it would seem as though they are spoiling him. Most likely, if anyone has been traumatized, Ichigo was the cause of it. Isshin said with a grin. When everyone stared at him, Isshin continued. Ichigo only became such a serious and angry person after his mother was killed. Before that, he was an award-winning troublemaker to everyone but his mother, and was quite the ladies' man, much like his old man. Isshin bellowed the last part with great pride. Everyone present sweat dropped. So, how about Tiburon Ichigo? Apache suggested as she bounced the small boy on her knee. But that's Halibel-sama's Zanpakuto. He should have her last name. Sunday through Sunday pointed out. Halibel-sama, what is your last name? Apache asked. Halibel shrugged slightly, then reached over to take her new son from Apache. Wasn't there an architect that had a name similar to Halibel-sama? Harry Bell Measures? Myra Rose asked as she played with the lizard that she had taken from Ichigo and was still holding onto. She grinned as she noticed Apache tensing at the sight of the lizard. Measures Ichigo? Ew! Apache cried out. Since Aizen-sama has recognized him as a legitimate son, traditionally Ichigo would take Aizen-sama's name as his own, Halibel pointed out as she bounced Ichigo slightly, before he caught sight of the lizard in Myra Rose's hands and reached out for it. Aizen Ichigo, Sunday through Sunday tried the name out before shaking her head slightly, it didn't feel right to her. He needs a pet. Apache muttered as she shifted away from the lizard. So, Apache is afraid of a little lizard. Myra Rose crowed as she saw the others shifting. Am not, the horned girl roared at the Amazon. You two are being immature, Sunday through Sunday stated coldly as she stood to follow Halibel who had just departed the room. What did you say, Sunday through Sunday, the two demanded as they followed Halibel, Ichigo, and Sunday through Sunday down the hall, their bickering getting worse as they descended down a set of stairs and onto a walkway that connected some of the larger internal buildings of Last Notches. Ichigo grinned as his mommy set him down and ran over to a wall to let the little lizard go, then ran back to hold onto her extended hand as they continued on their way. Apache stopped bickering for a few seconds as she shuddered at the sight of the lizard. "Where are we going, Halibel-sama?" Sunday through Sunday asked as they moved across the walkway, before she froze for a second. The building they were headed toward was the one where Ulquiorra and Yami lived. To find out if Aizen-sama has any preference on what Ichigo is called. Apache, Myra Rose, and Sunday through Sunday all nodded at Halibel's logic. Aizen-sama would certainly know what he wanted Ichigo named, and like it or not, the fastest way to get to his rooms was by this route. The building was quiet, too quiet, and despite the fact that they remained in the main traversing corridors, not the private ones, the three fraction could feel the cold presence of Ulquiorra and the wild, unrestrained one of Yami. Though Halibel and Ichigo seemed unaffected, the other three began to feel nervous, to the point where when Yami did suddenly, a small hollow dog trooping behind him, Apache and Myra Rose jumped slightly and stood behind Sunday through Sunday, who seemed rooted to her spot. "Ho, and where are you guys heading?" Yami asked, Ichigo cringing slightly behind Halibel, who was the only one who appeared unaffected by him. "To see Aizen-sama," Halibel replied as she stepped around Yami, but stopped when Ichigo reached out to lightly pet the small dog that followed Yami around. The small dog yipped slightly, and got closer to Ichigo so that he would pet him more, and when Ichigo complied, the little dog rolled over so he would pet his stomach. Yami either didn't care, or didn't notice that his dog was otherwise occupied, as he leered at Halibel's fraction. "So, the brat is staying with you guys now? How much chaos has he caused you?" The eyes of all four women narrowed at the reference to Ichigo, but Yami's pleas changed to annoyed as he turned to set off and noticed his dog happily playing with the child. Said dog had now turned back over and was licking Ichigo's face even as the boy continued to laugh and rub his ears. "Little pest," Yami muttered as he reached down and made to knock the brat away from his dog. He was stopped by Halibel and Ulquiorra simultaneously. "I wouldn't suggest you do that," Ulquiorra flatly said as he released Yami's arm. "Why is that, Ulquiorra?" Yami asked as Halibel lifted Ichigo up and walked down the hall, followed closely by Apache, Myra Rose, and Sunday through Sunday. The dog followed them as well. Right as they turned a corner and lost sight of the duo, they heard Yami yell a very loud, "What?" Their arrival at the throne room was announced by Jin almost pouncing on Halibel when he saw her holding Ichigo, resulting in Ichigo getting put back down onto the floor as he ran around Halibel's legs, swatting at Jin, who tried to tickle him. "Halibel, is something wrong?" Aizen's voice rang out over the throne room. "Daddy!" Ichigo called out in excitement as he dodged Jin's hands once more before running toward Aizen, who welcomed him by lifting him up into a gentle hug. "Nothing is wrong, Aizen-sama, we just wanted to determine one thing," Halibel replied. "What would that be? What is Ichigo's official name from now on?" Halibel queried. "I suggested Tiburon Ichigo since Halibel-sama doesn't seem to have a last name and that is her Zanpakuto," Apache declared. "There was a human architect by the name of Haribel Measures, since their names are so similar, I suggested that," Myra Rose stated. "Then there is also the point that you now recognize him as your son, so there is the possibility of Aizen Ichigo," Sunday through Sunday finished. Aizen stared at the women for a few seconds before turning his eyes back to the child in his arms, his mind quickly turning over the facts. "Saria, all right, so there are 2 votes going on right now. Who will watch Ichigo next?" Choices: Zomari, Stark, Araniro, and Barragan. Which name will Aizen choose? Choices: Tiburon, Measures, Aizen, or keep Kurosaki. Zas, chapter started to get long. Tori, and you wrote it a lot sooner than we thought. Essay, I blame Golden Week and boredom. Underscore 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 957 Chapter 10, Eaton. Saria is looking extremely peeved as she stares out the window. Tori, Look on the bright side, Saria, the rain has caused classes to be cancelled. Essay, glares at Tori, this isn't rain, it's a flood. Zas, Saria, I think you need to rescue your car. Saria, and put it where might I ask? Glares when she sees that the water is easily at least mid-thigh deep. Essay, well, might as well write the story. Not like you have anything else to do right now. Aizen, his name will be Aizen Ichigo, Aizen said as he bounced the small boy he held slightly. Ichigo laughed as he was bounced and hugged Aizen's arm happily before he slipped out of his father's arms and began to play happily with Yami's former dog. Of course, Aizen-sama, Halibel replied as she watched Ichigo scratch the hollow dog behind the ears. One other thing, Halibel, Aizen began before she could gather the boy and leave. Ichigo-chan will soon be big enough to train, but he doesn't have any appropriate clothing. I believe by the time the weavers and tailors here in Last Notches would be able to rectify that situation, it will already be too late. So, I believe you should take an experimental Gigai from Sayel and go to the human world so we can get a quick fix for the situation. Buy a number of clothes, especially ones for training, and in multiple sizes so that we can hopefully stay ahead of his growth. What of the child? Halibel asked as she tore her eyes from Ichigo to look Aizen in the eye. Shall I bring him with me? No, Aizen answered firmly. There is the possibility of you being attacked by the Shinigami, especially if you have Ichigo-chan with you. You should take your fraction with you instead, so that if there is an attack, you can defend yourself, and not lose any of your purchases. But if I take Apache, Myra Rose, and Sunday through Sunday with me, who will care for Ichigo? Jin grinned as he stuck his head into the throne room and was immediately noticed by Ichigo, who quickly rushed over to him. Hey Ichi-chan, I got you a surprise. Don't open it now though, no showing it to anyone else, and no telling where you got it from, Jin whispered as he tucked a small package into the child's yukata. Now be a good boy Ichigo, and don't do anything that Jin tells you to do, Halibel lectured as she carried the child into a different portion of the fortress. For that matter, don't do anything Yami, Noitora, or Sayel tell you to do either. Am I understood? Yes, Mommy, Ichigo answered in a dejected-sounding voice. Why can't I come? Because, I think you would be bored where I'm going. Here you can play with Fraction, the dog, and other little animals. Ichigo simply pouted. I'll be back soon enough, and when I return I'll have some new things for you. Ichigo still looked dejected, but she did notice a slight spark in his eyes at the promise of new things. Halibel then shoved open a door that they had just arrived at and gently put Ichigo down, right as a girl with shoulder-length hair and a helmet-style mask appeared. Lilinette, this is Ichigo, you and Stark are going to be watching him for the next couple of hours until I get back from a mission. Don't let any harm come to him. Halibel's voice was extremely firm at the last statement. She was gone only a moment later. So, you're the pipsqueak everyone's been talking about. Pleased to meet you, I'm Lilinette. The lazy BSTRD over on the cushions who is faking sleep is Stark. Ichigo's face was instantly hot as his temper rose. My name is Ichigo, not pipsqueak. Anyway, you want to have some fun, Ichigo? Lilinette asked, and at Ichigo's nod she immediately grabbed the boy's hand, turned, and sprinted across the room, jumping when she was about halfway across the room, and landed feet first on Stark's chest, dragging Ichigo the entire way. The insane girl then proceeded to start tickling Stark after his initial waking yelp, not stopping for several minutes, even when Ichigo joined in on the torturing of the Espada. Lilinette made a face at the closed door, the one that was meant to keep her out of Stark's bedroom, where he had retreated to as soon as there was a break in hers and Ichigo's attacks. Ichigo, on the other hand, decided that he should see what it was that Uncle Jin had gotten him, and though he knew that his uncle had told him not to show it to anyone, his mommy had said to not do anything that Jin said, so he probably should show Lilinette at least. Luckily, Lilinette saved him the effort of calling her over when she noticed the small package that the small boy was holding and rushed over to take a peek at what was inside. Wow, Ichigo said as he stared at the contents. Yum! Candy! Stark immediately lurched upright, horror filling his being when he heard Lilinette's voice scream that terrifying word in jubilation. The two children quickly split up the treats, laughing when several of the treats would up being pastries. Ichigo grabbed a pastry happily and bit into it after swallowing his first handful of candy. The pastry was filled with a jelly-like substance that tasted like raspberries, and it dribbled all over the front of his yukata. When Lilynette noticed, she began to giggle, but Ichigo retaliated by throwing the pastry at her, splattering her clothes with red also. "Ichigo, now we're both dirty," Lilynette exclaimed as she grabbed the boy's hand, causing him to drop the sweets box, and they both went into the changing area where Lilynette quickly threw off her clothes and covered herself with a towel before turning and assisting Ichigo with his clothing as well. "Need new clothes," Lilynette said, as she felt a new rush of energy take a hold of her. She then raced towards her room, Ichigo in tow, dumping their old, dirty clothing on the floor of the main room. It was just a bad dream, Stark told himself, even as he got up to go check on the children. Lilynette knows that she is not allowed candy, and who would give her any to start with? Baragon and Ulquiorra would never do something like that for anyone. Halibel wasn't here, Noitora or Grimjo would do it to torture him, Zomori didn't seem the type, Sayel and Yami were also definite no's, Aranero, maybe if he were trying to set up a trap to capture hollows to consume. Pausing at the door, Stark listened for a moment, listening intently for any sounds from the other room. For a long second, nothing could be heard aside from what sounded a lot like chewing noises and several cracks and snaps, then a door banged open and a set of feet scuttled out. Grabbing the handle for his door, Stark unlocked the door to his room and threw it open, casting a confused eye across the room before he caught sight of a horrifying thing. Lilynette's clothes were on the floor, and they were covered in a thick red substance. Rushing over to the discarded clothes, Stark felt his foot slip on another piece of discarded clothing and he landed HRD on his rear, but his attention was quickly drawn to the small piece of clothing now wrapped around his foot. A small yukata, and it was covered in the red stuff also. Lilynette and Ichigo were running around without their clothes. Wait a second, Stark thought as he noticed one more out-of-place item in the room, a small package that had some sugar crystals around it. A package for sweets. Stark's thoughts immediately flashed back to when he was trying to determine who would give out candy. Aranero! Stark yelled as he rushed out of the room, Zanpakuto at the ready. Maybe he could still rescue the little ones if he found that BSTRD fast and sliced open his stomach. This time of day, if Aranero had just eaten a big meal, he would be in the restricted training area practicing with his resurrection form. As he rushed down the halls toward that location, Stark felt his BLD rush. If anything happened to Lilynette, he wouldn't be able to forgive himself. And if anything happened to Ichigo, Halibel would have his hide. What made him certain though that Aranero would have eaten those two was the fact he knew that that idiot had in fact tried it before. Everyone knew that Aranero had practically had his jaw ripped off by Ulquiorra afterwards, though not many knew that it had happened when Ulquiorra was attempting to liberate his fist from the other's mouth. About halfway to the training ground though, Stark ran into someone who was almost unexpected. Tesla, who upon spying Stark had immediately started running at the mouth. Did you hear about what happened? Can you believe it? I mean, I know that Aizen wanted Ichigo-san to join us, but to go this far? Unheard of. Natora-sama just found out, and he was peeved. Heard about what? Stark replied as he continued his forward rush. Aizen-sama adopted Ichigo-san. Stark almost misstepped at that comment. The situation had just gotten a lot worse with that one comment. If Ichigo had even a scratch on him now, not just Halibel, but Aizen would have his hide as well. Pushing his speed faster than ever, Stark quickly left Tesla in his wake and he barreled onto the training ground. At full speed. Sure enough, there was Aranero, in his released form, fighting and devouring several lower-class Arankar and Hollows. Choke them up, you BSTRD! Stark yelled as he charged at the bloated abomination. Starkinathistarki no Tharuhir Storki. Lilynette chanted as she bounced on her heels. Wanna play Gata play? Ichigo bounced on his heels just as eagerly. Lilynette, did you see Stark? Tesla poked his head into the room. I just passed him and he was running full speed toward the restricted training grounds. He looked like he was panicked or something. Stark, I went to the training grounds. Omigo domigod. Ichigo, let's go. The young girl gushed as she grabbed Ichigo's hand again and ran out of the room. They left behind a very confused Tesla who was wondering why the two were just wearing towels. Where are they? Stark yelled as he sliced into Araniro's hide for the 5th time, reaching into the fat form of the other's resurrection, finding another only partially digested being, yanking them out, and searching to see if there were any more. He was so engrossed in his self-appointed task that he completely missed Lilynette and Ichigo racing onto the training grounds, tripping over the body of one of the Arrancar that Stark had rescued, and both falling headfirst into the first cut created by Stark. Araniro missed it as well when the two entered, but both noticed soon enough when Lilynette started hacking her way out using her Zanpakuto. Lilynette! Stark yelled, relief flooding him to see her relatively unharmed, though covered in guts and gore, and she was naked as well. Where's Ichigo? He's down there too. Araniro yelled but was ignored by both the Primera and the Fraction. Storky! Ichigo de tripped and he's still inside that thing. Get him out, Storky! Lilynette, though slightly more sober due to the traumatic event of touching Araniro, was still sugar high, and now just more excited. Stark didn't hesitate as he charged the widened hole that Lilynette caused and started digging through the mess, once again ignoring Araniro's screams of rage and pain. Seconds passed, then about 2 feet to the right of Stark, another sword appeared. Thinking that it was just another unfortunate trying to escape Araniro's bowels, Stark turned his attention back to trying to find the helpless Ichigo. Then an orange mop of hair appeared behind the sword. Stark's arms lashed out in an instant to grab the child's shoulders and tug him out as well. The boy slid out relatively easily, and Stark saw that he, like Lilynette, was in only his birthday suit. He also looked a lot more dazed than Lilynette, and his first words were, "Lost towel." What happened? Whose Zanpakuto is that? Stark asked as he set Ichigo down and began to scan around the area, looking for something to cover the kids with. Sideways World, old man said had to get out and he could help. Sword appeared then and I don't know what happened. Scaried. Ichigo said as he began to tear up. It's okay now, Stark soothed as he realized that Ichigo had unknowingly called forth his Zanpakuto. He grabbed a jacket from a groaning mess of a male and quickly wrapped it around Lilynette's shoulders. He turned his attention back to locating something for Ichigo when Lilynette began to laugh again. Lilynette, what's wrong? Stark asked, almost afraid that she had finally cracked and was going to jump onto the insane bandwagon with Sayel. I have a sister now. See? Lilynette replied as Stark turned to see that Ichigo was now dressed in a skirt. A skirt that Lilynette had gotten from one of the scantily clad girls lying on the ground. Stark felt his eye begin to twitch and reminded himself that he knew Lilynette, and that this shouldn't surprise him. The fact it didn't help the twitch. Lilynette, why don't you go to your room and get some clothes to wear? Stark asked as he took another jacket from another male and wrapped Ichigo in that, lifting the boy's Zanpakuto also. He needed to report this development to Aizen. Because I'm out of uniforms. Lilynette replied as she followed Stark out of the area, all of them once again ignoring Araniro's yells. A bath and a visit to the supply room later, and both Lilynette and Ichigo were fresh and clothed. The former was now running through a series of katas using her own Zanpakuto, and jabbering happily to Stark on games she wanted to play with Ichigo after her practice session. Ichigo, on the other hand, was wiped out by their adventure and gaining his Zanpakuto and was currently napping on Stark's favorite mound of pillows. Stark wished he could take a nap as well, but after what happened last time with the 2 children when left unattended, he decided that that would be a bad idea. Jin had stopped by also and had heard all about Araniro's ploy to consume the children by luring them out with candy and Ichigo awakening his Zanpakuto. Stark decided for everyone's sake though, he'd leave out the part where Ichigo and Lilynette were actually eaten. Jin had agreed to go and inform Aizen of his son's adventures and to ensure that Araniro received a harsh punishment. And it could have only been his imagination, but Stark was almost certain he heard Araniro screaming later on, right before Halibel came to pick up Ichigo for that matter. The odd part was, Jin told him later that there was almost a 30-minute gap between the time when she checked in with Aizen and when she came to pick up Ichigo, when it didn't even take 10 minutes to get from the throne room to Stark's rooms. Saria: okay, that's the chapter, so once again, we shall vote as to who gets shafter. I mean, who gets to babysit Ichigo next? Tori: shows is that now remain Zomori, Baragon, and Araniro. And just so everyone knows, I think Saria is planning on extending this fic, maybe even writing a sequel since there have been so many requests for one. Zas: she's already making plans for it, now she just needs motivation. Essay: Saria, water. Points at where water is finally starting to enter the apartment despite the duct tape on the door and windows. Saria: holy monkeys. Grabs her cat, her laptop, and a poncho, and runs to join her neighbors on the roof, DMNU Volusia County. Underscore 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 957 Chapter 11, Sero. Essay and Saria, angrily fuming. Zas: well, it took 3 days of sitting on the roof, but we were eventually rescued. Essay: and they stuck us in a storm shelter. Saria: with about 30 people in every room. Tori: and the showers here are just awful. Essay and Saria both glare at Tori. Zas: look on the bright side, we'll be able to return to the apartment in about 2 weeks, once all the carpet has been ripped out and replaced, the drywall torn out, doors replaced, an electrician has cleared the electrical outlets and a plumber has checked the pipes. We'll need to replace the furniture. And the food in the fridge. All stare glumly at the crowded shelter room, sigh. The next day went smooth enough for everyone in last notches, or about as smooth as things could get with a 3-year-old Ichigo present. Aizen decided that due to Ichigo awakening his Zanpakuto, he should immediately start learning Kido. So it was not surprising when at breakfast that morning that Halibel was told that she would need to bring Ichigo to the training grounds with her. Ichigo had cheered from his high seat and accidentally splashed the side of Jin's head with miso soup. Luckily, Jin knew better than to start a food fight that morning though, so he let it slide. Ichigo laughed as he ran out onto the main training grounds with his mommy and saw that Unki-to-san was already there and had several targets set up. Unki-jin was helping him set up the last of the targets, and along the sidelines of the area that they had taken control of, a number of Fraction and several of the Espada were arranging themselves to watch the lesson. Halibel was pleased to see that her Fraction were already there and had gotten prime seats, right next to Baragon, and she winced when she saw that she would be next to Sayel. Ulquiorra and Yami had shown up, the latter of them holding several large bags of popcorn. Araniro was nowhere in sight, not that Halibel blamed him or cared, especially after the beating she had given him the night before. As she walked over to the area that her Fraction had reserved, Halibel wondered for a second which field of Kido Chusen would start Ichigo with, Hado or Bakudo. Some part of her hoped it would be Hado, because she was willing to admit that as scary as you would think it could be to see Ichigo running around firing fireballs and lightning, Halibel did believe it would be a lot worse if Ichigo were capable of binding people. At least most of the Arrancar would stand a decent chance at survival if they just had to dodge fireballs and lightning. Turning her attention back onto the practice field, Halibel watched as Chusen approached Ichigo, giving him a basic introduction to Kido and the uses of it as well as helping him take on the proper stance for firing Kido. Then, Chusen pointed at one of the targets, stepping back as Ichigo turned his attention toward the target and raised his hands to point them at the target. And stood there. Hey, Chusen, Jin said as he noted the child's confusion. You did remember to tell him what the incantation for the spell was, didn't you? Chusen practically tripped over himself as he rushed back out to Ichigo. Okay, everyone ready to try this for the second time? Urahara called out to Renji, Chad, Ishida, and Rukia. Just open the Garganta already. Renji called back as he adjusted his stance. Remember, I'm going to try to get you guys as close to Kurosakikun's position as I can. When you get there, try to determine if he is fact a small child or not. Either way though, you need to bring him back. Urahara smiled as the Garganta finally opened and the assorted Shinigami and humans jumped into the opening. Bind thy hands and walk the path of peace. Ichigo yelled as he pointed his hands at the target. All of the gathered Shinigami and Arrancar felt a sharp spike in the boy's Reiatsu. Bakudu number 1, Sai. For a moment it seemed as though nothing happened, then the target he was aiming at exploded into a shower of splinters and sparks. Quite different from Towson's example, that just had a series of imprints that looked as though ropes had been pulled too tightly around the target. Chusen moved quickly to where the target had previously stood and began yet another long-winded lecture, this one on how Ichigo was overloading the technique and how he should try holding back on some of his Reiatsu, not just let it go. Try it again, he called to the boy after the explanation was done. Ichigo nodded as he prepared to fire again. "Ano, Towson-san," Jin called out from the sidelines. "Not right now, Ichimaru," Chusen answered, not wanting to be bothered at the moment. "But don't you think you should?" Jin was cut off by Grimjo's hand covering his mouth. "Bind thy hands and walk the path of peace. Bakudu number 1, Sai." Ichigo called out as he aimed at one of the targets. Chusen, to his credit, knew he was not stupid. But he did have a tendency to miss some rather obvious things in hindsight. Things such as like when he became a known traitor of Soul Society, of course Komamura was going to turn on him. And probably would have killed him if he had not first tried to take on Aizen. This fact was being proven again as he realized, right as Ichigo finished the incantation, that he was easily standing in either the path of the spell or the immediate blast radius. Once again though, as luck would have it, he was saved, due to an alarm going off right as spell was released and Ichigo's Reiatsu flow was stemmed due to the diversion of the child's attention. The result, Ichigo accidentally fired a perfect Bakudu number 1. And it was aimed straight at Chusen, who went crashing down to his knees and face planted into the sand. Despite the alarms, Towson's muffled yells of surprise easily got the attention of every being that had been watching the training session, at least 30 Arrancar plus Jin. There was lots of muffled laughter, some pointing, Grimjo laughing with abandon, and a number of wagers being paid out. Espada numbers 3, 4, 5, and 6 are to prepare for battle immediately. Shinigami and humans have come to Hueco-mun-do, a voice called out over the intercom system. Aizen-sama wishes for those numbers and their fraction to report to the meeting room for review of the plans. Halibel jumped up at her number being called and was further surprised to hear that they wished for her to bring her fraction with her as well. There wasn't going to be anyone to watch Ichigo. Baragon, in an odd moment of kindness, noticed her distress and chose to lend a hand. "Go on, I'll watch the brat Halibel," he told her, noting that she jumped slightly in surprise at his offer. Narrowing her eyes as she realized that at the moment this was the best she could hope for, Halibel answered, "Thank you Baragon," before turning and making her way off the training grounds, Apache, Myra rose, and Sunday through Sunday falling in step behind her. Taking note of the fact that Chusen was probably out for the count, mainly because he was struggling and rolling around in the sand, Baragon rose from his seat and marched out onto the strip that Ichigo was situated on. "Chusen looks as though he won't be of much use right now, so I'll be taking over this lesson," Baragon announced as he signaled to his fraction. Poe and Finder jumped up and rushed to Chusen, lifting him and removing the still entangled Shinigami from the target area. "Seeing as how I'm unable to perform Kido though, but also realizing that you have hollow abilities, I'm going to teach you techniques that are primary for an Arrancar. They are the Sero, Bala, and how to open a Garganta." Another signal brought Jijo and Coolhorn out onto the firing range. "Jijo, demonstrate a Bala," Baragon ordered. "Yes sir." Jijo answered as he turned to the targets and fired a simple low-powered Bala at one of them, just denting the wooden target. "Coolhorn, demonstrate a Sero." "Of course." Coolhorn declared as he swung around to face the targets, adapting a ridiculous pose as he did involving tucking one leg up like a flamingo and throwing his arms up like a ballerina's. Appealing Charlotte Coolhorn's holy final wonderful pretty. Baragon face-palmed as various other Arrancar groaned, hid their faces, puked, or any combination of the aforementioned. Ichigo was the luckiest in that he was able to duck behind Baragon while covering his ears. Super Magnum sexy glam dash. Enough! Baragon boomed, cutting Coolhorn off and saving the vision and hearing of the amassed Arrancar plus Jin and Chusen. Just a Zero Coolhorn, no displays. Zero, Coolhorn deadpanned as he shot one at a target, incinerating the thing, and then began to walk in a dejected fashion back toward the seating area. Finally, we have Gargantas, which look like this, Baragon said in a calm tone as he opened one of the black mouths. Using these, travel between this world and the world of humans is possible. A being who is advanced in the usage of these is capable of using them to get anywhere that they could possibly want to go, even into the Soul Society. Ichigo moved out from behind Baragon to get a better look at the Garganta, then smiled and declared cool, in a loud voice, and all were a little surprised to hear an echo. So, which do you want to learn first, Ichi-chan? Jin asked as he approached the Espada and child. Echo! Ichigo called into the void and laughed when word came back to him. It was then that Chusen finally was able to break the binding Kido, as with a loud groan he pushed all of his remaining Reiatsu against the technique. A blinding flash and shock wave threw everyone off balance for a second, and then it was over. There was just one problem. Ichi-chan fell into the Garganta. Jin screamed, and jumped into the tier. He was followed by Baragon, Po, Avirama, Nerga, Jijo, and Sayelaporo plus 2 of his fraction. The rip closed before any of the others on the training grounds could follow, and every one of them shared the same thought, which was, we are so dead if Aizen and Halibel find out about this. So, do you feel him? Where is he? Renji demanded as he stared at Ishida, who was attempting to scan the area to locate Kurosaki Ichigo. He's not here. Not anywhere, the Quincy replied as he tried to scan again. Then they must have him restrained or something, Rukia said as she scrutinized last notches. Do you think we should have brought Oriheim along rather than have her wait on the other side, just in case? No, it's better this way. After all, Aizen did seem interested in her powers, Ishida replied. Still no sign of Kurosaki. We better start searching then, Ched said as he took one toward one of the nearby building. Falling through a black abyss was not something that Ichigo would call fun by any means of the imagination, even if it did make funny noises. So when he dropped out of the black space and into a rather modest-looking park, the tiny child began to sob out of pure relief. The Arrancar plus Jin landed in what seemed like a warehouse district and none of them could feel the brat's Reiatsu. Apparently, after Grimjo's first attack the Soul Society had set up some sort of block to prevent the Arrancar from using their pesquisa to locate those with heightened Reiatsu. That meant that they were going to have to split up and look for the kid themselves. The agreed-upon signal was a single bala to be fired into the air if they found him, followed by an immediate retreat back to last notches. Why are you crying? A voice asked Ichigo as he slowly pulled himself together. Not crying, the orange-haired child denied. Big boys don't cry. You were too crying, declared the young girl who was apparently the one who had initially asked him why he had been crying. Her hair was short and brown, and Ichigo had a sudden sense of déjà vu, as though he knew this girl. Was not, he yelled back at the girl. Were too. Jin scanned the street he was currently on, checking for Reiatsu, orange hair, or white clothing. All three were in short supply, especially on small children. But Jin did see one thing that he recognized. Urahara Kisuke, and next to him was Shihuin Yoruichi. Jin stifled a giggle when he saw that they were holding hands. Jijo and Nerga plowed through the crowd of children that they had found coming out of the tall white building. Both would grab one, pick that kid up, usually determined that it couldn't be Ichigo, and set them down again. There were several problems with this though. The first was that they were standing outside of a school that had just let out. The next was that the kids thought that they were playing rocket ship and started forming lines. The last was that parents and teachers were starting to get interested. Jijo, I think I've seen this one before. Nerga shouted as he set the kid down. I know. Jijo said as he stared at the child he had just lifted. How many of these things are there in this world? I'm going to kill M, I'm going to smash M, I'm going to. Avirama, there is no need to start making war cries just because one person was rude to you, Po said as he pushed Avirama away from the confused owner of the newsstand. Did you hear what he said to me? Avirama screamed as he turned and shot an evil eye at the man. He said no, that he hadn't seen an orange-haired brat, and with your attitude he would sooner call the police than tell you if he did, Po replied smoothly as he turned to a woman who they were about pass on the sidewalk. Have you seen a young boy, about 3 to 4 years old with orange hair? Can't say that I have. Why do you ask? The woman replied. Because we are obviously looking for one. He's our MSDR's son. Avirama yelled, silently cursing the idiocy of some people. The woman was obviously taken back a bit by Avirama's tone, but then pointed toward a particular building. I think I'm going to go alert the police about you too. Sayel Apo Rosama. SZALAPRO-sama. Sayel turned to look as his two fraction, Lumina and Verona, bounced up to him. Found him, found him. Lumina chanted as he held up a small child, and Sayel groaned. That is not him. Sayel snapped as he took the child from Lumina and set it down. First and foremost, this is a girl. Not a boy. Also, her hair is black, not orange. Now, I want the two of you to. Excuse me, a rather angry-looking woman huffed as she rushed up to the small group. The little girl happily ran up to the woman. Your men here just took my daughter. What have you to say about this? That we weren't after your little brat and that you need to seriously consider a diet. Now take your worthless daughter and leave, we're busy. Sayel snapped. A second later he received a faceful of the woman's purse. Were two. Was not. Barragan turned his head at the sound of a young boy's voice and was glad to see an orange head. Jumping the hedge into the park, the elderly Espada easily made his way over to the two squabbling children. Before he could get to them though, a weird guy with a beard suddenly jumped in. Children? No fighting, the man declared as he waved his arms wildly. I know how to make you two laugh. Pulling several clothespins out of his pants, the man proceeded to clip them to his beard, then struck a pose and yelled out bearded drama in a dramatic fashion. Barragan was aghast. This guy made Coolhorn seem normal. You've done this before and it was no funnier than it is now, the girl yelled as she grabbed the clothespins and yanked, strong. Karen, my sweet daughter, why do you hurt daddy like this? The grown man cried as he began to cry. Barragan had seen enough. Reaching over, he easily lifted Ichigo up and whispered, let's get you out of here before you pick up any unsavory habits. Pointing his hand to the sky, the Espada fired a quick bala and turned to leave, but the man's next comment stopped him in his tracks. Arrancar, the goofy man, suddenly hissed. What do you think you're doing with that child? Nothing that should concern you, human, Barragan replied as he ripped the space behind him, opening the garganta, and stepped through. Aizen Summer. You'll never guess what I saw in the human world. Jin announced as he giddily rushed into the throne room, right as Halibel, Ulquiorra, Notora, and Grim Joe marched past him, on their way to deal with the intruders. They were followed by their respective fraction. What would that be, Jin? Aizen asked, ready for some news. Ichigo, Barragan, Jijo, Nerga, Po, Avirama, and Sayel -2 fraction were back on the training grounds, the Garganta just beginning to close when Halibel and the other Espada arrived, as well the intruders. Halibel's eyebrows raised when she saw the Garganta and the mostly empty training grounds, but before she could ask any questions, the entire group of intruders rushed toward Ichigo. Charlotte Coolhorn believed that this could finally be her chance to prove that she was both strong and appealing. And she could do it with her ultimate attack. Behold, it yelled as it jumped before the intruders. Appealing Charlotte Coolhorn's holy final wonderful pretty glamorous super magnum. Everyone on the training grounds froze in horror at Coolhorn's stances and ultra long-windedness. And poor Ichigo was the closest of everyone and received the full blast of the sheer horrific sight. Yet somewhere in his young mind, something clicked and he raised his hand, preparing to fire. Sexy sexy aughhh. Charlotte Coolhorn screamed as it lurched forward. My bum is burning. And sure enough, the seat of Coolhorn's pants were ablaze, caused by the Sero that Ichigo had just fired. With the horror spell caused by Coolhorn finally over, Renji and Chad were the first to recover, and before the nightmarish being could recover, quickly gathered Rukia and Ishida and jumped through the Garganta right before it closed. Halibel recovered next and ran to Ichigo and scooped the boy up, proudly declaring that his Sero was brilliant. Baragon recovered a second later and proceeded to drag Coolhorn off so that he could yell at him in peace about why his techniques were so lethal and why Coolhorn wasn't supposed to use them unless he was very far away. Sayelaporo-san, what happened to your fraction? Po asked as they turned to head inside. An angry human woman started hitting me after they took her daughter, Sayel replied angrily. I ate them out of frustration afterwards. Saria, all right, so that just leaves Araniro and Zomori. And I will be extending this fic for a few chapters anyway. Then the sequel will start. Zas looks around the room. This is so much better than the shelter. Tori, yep. Essay, this is Saria's parents' house. Zas, so? We're in Tampa now. Right in time for Metricon. All, we're going to Metricon. Chapter 12, Swords and Coats. Saria, Metrocon was awesome. Tori, the Organization 13 group was back again. Zas, human chess match was okay, definitely could evolve into something. Essay, Saria got into a screaming contest and fainted from lack of air. Roffelmau. Saria, surrounded by dark cloud of depression, you didn't have to mention that. Tori, why? You still won in the end. Everyone, on another note, I plan to combine the torture of Araniro and Zomori into one chapter. The reason, I got the same number of votes for both of them, and it would be pointless to poll again before the other had their chapter written. After this chapter, voting will begin again with all of the Hueco Mundo crew thrown back into the pool for the poll. So, Ichigo-chan did manage to perform both a simple Kidu spell and a Sero? Aizen asked at dinner that night. The small child giggled as his daddy gave him an approving look when Chusen confirmed the fact. So, how about a special treat for Ichi-chan? Jin asked from his seat across from the child. A flashback of the kitchen and staff covered in ice cream and various condiments flashed into Aizen's head, but he now knew better than to say an outright no to Jin. The silver-haired man would find some way to get his way in the end. I don't see why we couldn't do something special, Aizen replied, something small and controlled. How about a swordsmanship lesson with his Zanpakuto tomorrow? Chusen suggested as he took a bite of his rice. Zomori would probably be willing to teach him some basic stances as well as start him on learning Shuanpa. Aizen nodded as he felt himself mentally sigh with relief. Knowing Jin, he'd want to throw a cake and ice cream party, at midnight, in this dining room, and try to get every Arrancar who was foolish enough to attend Sugar High. Aizen grimaced at the idea of either Grimjo or Noitora Sugar Hide. Zomori at least did seem to understand the idea of calm and controlled. Yes, that should be an appropriate thing, Aizen stated as he took another bite of his dinner. Halibel woke to the sound of groaning coming from the area where Ichigo's bed was. Immediately standing from her own bed, she quietly moved to the child's bed to check on him. A small orange head was still snuggled into his pillow, though he looked as though his sleep was a little on the disturbed side, and as she watched in numb horror, another groan came from the small form as something seemed to shift under his skin. His body grew some and she could tell that he was getting a bit older, now looking to be about 7 years old. His clothes were now too tight. Halibel searched through a set of drawers near his bed and found a new set of pajamas, then seated herself on the bed, lifting Ichigo onto her lap and proceeded to change him, doing her best to not rouse him. Of course though, right after she finished changing him, Ichigo's eyes opened and sleepily took her in. Mom? Is something wrong? No, everything is fine. Go back to sleep, Halibel answered as she tucked the boy back into his bed. And I will make certain that everything remains fine, she thought when she noticed that Ichigo was asleep already. Breakfast the next morning started out interesting as Ichigo and Halibel entered the dining room when Jin stood up immediately upon spying Ichigo and demanded to know who gave him permission to grow. Ichigo on the other hand simply giggled, skipped around Jin, and latched onto Aizen's legs. Aizen smiled at his son and ruffled the child's orange hair as Jin stared at the scene, jealousy rearing its head for a moment before he jumped behind the child and started tickling the 7-year-old. Ichigo cried out and fell to the floor, laughing as Jin continued to tickle him. "Stop!" Ichigo cried in between gasps for air. "I'll stop when you say that I'm your favorite person, Ichi-chan." Jin replied as he continued tickling. "Jin," Aizen's voice caused Jin to freeze for a moment. "Is that very appropriate behavior for before breakfast?" "But Aizen-sama, Ichi-chan was ignoring me." Jin whined as he attempted to make puppy dog eyes at Aizen. Still, this sort of behavior shouldn't be demonstrated in a dining room, especially right before a meal. "Okay, Aizen-sama," Jin said, dejection obvious in his voice. Standing, he started to walk to the table. "Bakudo number 1, Sai." Ichigo's voice called out and a second later Jin fell onto Aizen, laughter coming easily at Ichigo's revenge. When Halibel arrived at the training ground with Ichigo, Zomori was already there, attempting to find some usable remnant of the training dummies that had been destroyed the day before. Unlike yesterday, however, the event was not attended by half of the population of Las Noches. In fact, after yesterday, Halibel doubted she would see even as many Arrancar as there were there now. Ulquiorra was at the far side of the grounds, running through a series of sword stances, some of the lower class and new recruits mimicking his motions. Oddly enough, Araniro was amongst them, upon spying her. However, he sheathed his Zanpakuto and started to slowly slink toward the exit. "Zomori, what is Araniro doing here?" "He never shows an interest in learning the proper method of swordplay," Halibel asked. "He came this morning and said he believed it would be to his benefit to learn and not rely on the memories of those he has devoured." "Have you seen any training dummies that are in one piece?" "I intend to teach." Zomori's gaze turned toward Ichigo, the child where to strike on an opponent. An idea hit Halibel in that moment, one that would allow Araniro to get his training and serve a greater purpose to them as well. "Araniro," she called out as she turned, sonodoed across the room, and grabbed the Novena Espada by the neck of his frilly outfit before he could beat a hasty retreat. "I think it would be a great idea, Aizen-sama. Ichi-chan would be certain to love it also. And the Arrancar would find a new way to take out their extra aggression." Jin explained as he followed the former 5th Division captain down the hall. "Jin, I already said no." "But you said no to cake, ice cream, pudding, pear, donuts, and shaved ice already. This is none of those and would be equally fun." "Jin, I said no, and that means no." Aizen then pointed at the object that Jin was carrying. "There will definitely be no pinatas here, especially ones in the shape of my head." Araniro always believed that he was decent with his Zanpakuto despite the fact he never swung it. He was certain that his memories from Shiba Kane would help him in that department if he ever got into a fight. He was wrong. He was losing to a 7-year-old for crying out loud. As he watched, the brat circled him, the wooden training sword in his hands pointing at him, his grip already corrected several times by Zomori. The fish tank wearer was also keenly aware of Halibel's glare from behind him, more than ready to grab him if he attempted to escape again. "Why doesn't she just shish kebab me already and get it over with?" he thought, and completely missed it when Ichigo leaped at him and he received a sharp rap over his helmeted head followed up by a vicious swipe at his shins. He had no one to blame except his slow reflexes for not being able to stop the blow to his shins and his own inattention for the knock upside his head. That didn't stop him from getting angry. "I wasn't ready yet, you brat!" Araniro yelled as he swiped his own training sword at the aforementioned brat. Then felt even more foolish as the brat caught the blow with his training sword, used the momentum to spin himself around and rammed the large, blunt piece of wood straight into his midsection. "I think that is enough for swordplay today," Zomori announced as he moved between the two. "How about we move on to what my specialty is, which is Sonodo?" Seeing his chance to escape, or at least take a breather, Araniro hobbled over to the wall and slid down to sit against it. Glancing back at the center of the training ground, he saw that Zomori was giving a simplified version of how to perform Sonido, what the feeling could be compared to, as well as giving a demonstration by flashing to the other side of the training grounds and back. The orange-haired brat named Ichigo bounced around for a few seconds, excited at the idea of doing something so incredibly awesome as the brat said. Everyone on the training grounds froze for a second and watched as the boy got ready to try the Sonido. There was a pause for a few seconds and the boy took off, running. Definitely not a Sonido. Not quite, Zomori yelled after the kid. Think about willing yourself forward and using your Reiatsu to make it possible. A proper Sonido shouldn't require for you to run. Zomori is trying to be more patient and calm with Halibel here, Araniro noted as he watched the boy turn slightly and get ready to try it again. He'll probably perform one this time, Araniro called to Halibel. But it'll be out of control. I'd prepare to treat a few scrapes and bruises if I were you. Halibel's reply was a glare in his direction before turning her attention back onto the training session. Once again, the training grounds grew quiet right before Ichigo took off again, this time actually disappearing in a Sonido. Wham! For Ulquiorra, guiding new and weak Arrancar through the basics of swordsmanship was never a job he looked forward to, and recently it had been harder to get these Arrancar to focus on the training with Ichigo on in the same area. He should have realized though that turning his back on the brat, especially when he was learning Sonido, would end with him being barreled into. Still, he mentally growled and berated himself as he stood and attempted to untangle the brat from his coat tails. The fact Ichigo was also attempting to extract himself only made matters worse as he made himself even more entangled and started to drag Ulquiorra into the mess as well despite the fact he should have been well out of the tangle. Turning to try to address the issue more directly only made matters worse as a portion of his jacket snagged onto his horn and then wrenched his head in an odd direction. Zomori finally decided to try giving a hand to the entangled males, and Ichigo latched onto the Dark Espada's arm, attempting to pull himself out of the mess. He caused an even bigger one that involved Zomori being thrown off balance, falling on top of Ulquiorra, and Ichigo being at the top of the pile, working himself free and wrapping the cloth more firmly around the Arrancar below. Just so you're aware Ulquiorra-sama, I didn't intend for this to happen at all, nor am I enjoying it, Zomori said when at one point his twisting around caused him to come face to face with Ulquiorra. And is your coat stretching or growing by any chance? I know you're not a pervert like Sayel, and I'm not certain about the second question. Ulquiorra's voice was the same as it always was, despite the position he was in. Then Ichigo managed to rip himself free, and did it by bouncing off of Zomori's head, forcing the two into a lip lock. Araniro tried his best to keep his laughter quiet, honestly he did. But seeing Zomori and Ulquiorra forced into an embrace by Ichigo was the straw that broke the camel's back and he was rolling all over the ground howling with laughter. He completely missed Jin's arrival at the training grounds. Halibel didn't. Jin, what are you carrying? The shark hollow asked. Aizen-sama said no pinatas in the shape of his head, so I'm seeing if he would warm up to the idea of a different shape. Jin then held up the new pinata. I decided that since everyone is ready to kick Araniro's but these days that his head would make a great shape for a pinata. Halibel stared at the pinata for a second, then reached out and grabbed it from Jin. Checking to ensure that there was already candy inside, she quickly shoved the entire thing over Araniro's head. Ichigo! Come here for a second, the female Espada called as she heard Araniro give a muffled curse and attempt to remove the pinata from his head. Luckily, Jin seemed to follow her train of thought and quickly cast a Kidu to immobilize Araniro's hands and arms. Something wrong, Mom? Ichigo asked as he came up to her and Jin. Halibel smiled and passed him back his wooden training sword from earlier. Uncle Jin has arranged a special treat for you today. Reaching over and patting the top of the pinata, she continued. You see, this is called a pinata. The point is that you have to try to hit the pinata. The harder you hit, the more candy you'll get. Ichigo's eyes went wide and he brandished the wooden sword, ready to start whacking in at moment's notice. Jin at that point hauled Araniro to his feet and shoved him to make him start moving, the binding Kidu still in place. Ichigo was after him not even a moment later, the first blow that he landed hitting Senior Fish Tank straight across his right shoulder. After that moment, Araniro, though he couldn't see, ran like the devil was on his heels. I see that Stark is likely to have told you his story on Araniro trying to eat Ichigo and Lilinet and him saving them from his bowels by cutting him open, Jin said in a conversation tone. Hallibel's eyes were instantly ablaze. No, he didn't, she replied sweetly. He didn't tell me any of that. All that I heard on the issue was what Aizen-sama told me yesterday about him luring him away from Stark using candy. But please, tell me more on this. Saria, and that is all the Espada. As you all know, I'm going to continue with this fic, so that means everyone is back in the pool to be voted for, except that Sayel shall now be included. Tori, so, who shall be next? Yami, Stark, Barragan, Hallibel, Ulquiorra, Nitora, Grimjo, Zomari, Sayel, Araniro, Aizen, Tusen, or Jin. Zas, we won't know until the public speaks. So tell us who you want. Essay, grab earplugs, you guys are too loud. Chapter 13, Candy and Underwear. Saria, okay, moving bites. You get no internet for weeks on end, you don't know which channels your favorite stations are on anymore, the restaurants are different, even grocery shopping is difficult. Essay, you leave all your friends behind. Gain a new schedule, a new job also. Zas, new hangouts have to be found, new conventions to look into, plans that you had for several months in advance have to be set aside. Saria, Essay, and Zas, deep, dark cloud of depression. Tori, Texas sunburn. We moved from Florida to Texas and got the first sunburn of our lives. Saria, not to mention the beef that the doctors gave me over that. Ichigo. Aizen almost yelled as he hurried up next to the child who was using a wooden training sword to beat what looked like a pinata that had gotten stuck on someone's head. What do you think you're doing? Aizen-sama. A very relieved voice called out from the beaten wreckage of the pinata. A quick cursory of the clothing worn by the unfortunate who had been getting pummeled but a few seconds ago told Aizen that it was Araniro. The BSTRD who had tried to devour Ichigo and Lilinet a few days ago, but who had wisely stayed out of his sight since. Too bad for him. Ichigo, pinata should be hung from the ceiling by a rope, and you should be wearing a BLNDFLD and using a bat. Aizen reprimanded as he used an altered Kidu to manifest a rope around Araniro, and then produced a white cloth to be used as a BLNDFLD. I'm afraid we don't have any bats handy though, so continue using that training sword. But be careful not to hit anything else with it. Araniro's anguished cries at his abandonment followed Aizen out into the corridor where he met a confused-looking Grimjo, clutching his Pantera hopefully, as he walked toward where the screams were coming from. Grimjo, Aizen addressed him. Ichigo seems to have found a pinata, would you mind assisting him with it? I believe it still needs to be hung appropriately from the ceiling. After he's done, be sure to SCRT the child back to Hallibel. Grimjo roared with laughter as the blindfolded Ichigo managed to land another blow on Araniro, this time cracking him in the rib since his aim was a little high. Not that Grimjo was going to tell him that the pinata casing had already been busted though. He had never liked Araniro, and being able to hold the rope that held the BSTRD upside down as a child pummeled him with a training sword was almost as good as being able to beat on him with Pantera. Almost, but definitely not quite as good. Though it didn't help that Araniro had stopped screaming. Glancing over at the Jillian, Grimjo almost groaned as he noted that Araniro was no longer screaming because he was unconscious. No fun in beating him like that. All right, brat, that's enough. Grimjo called as he released the rope holding Araniro up. Let's gather up the candy and get you back. Candy? Ichigo screamed as he ripped off the BLNDFLD and started to scan the floor in search of the sugary confections. Where is it? Grimjo raised an eyebrow, then scanned the floor himself, searching for the pinata stuffers, and upon finding none, walked up to Araniro and rolled him over. EWW, cried the orange-haired child as they both got a glimpse of the candy, now a mess that decorated Araniro's backside. Gotta agree with you there, brat, Grimjo muttered as he stared at the mess. Come on, let's get you back to Halibel. But I want candy. Grimjo growled under his breath. He didn't take orders from Aizen, so there was no way he was going to be ordered around by a 7-year-old. Halibel can get you some candy, so let's go. Mom doesn't like to give me sweets, says they are bad for me. Well then, listen to your mom, kid. Grimjo shot back. Meanie, Ichigo shouted as he kicked Grimjo's knee. DMN brat. Grimjo yelled as he lunged at the child. Stupid kitty, the boy shouted as he dodged then took off down the hall, shifting into Sonido when he was halfway down the hall. Grimjo growled once again as he followed the kid with his own Sonido, catching up very quickly as the brat smashed into the wall at a corner. Ichigo promptly scowled then turned in time for Grimjo to roughly grab his shoulder, jerking the boy around. Oh! Ichigo yelled. You're hurting me. I said we're going back to Halibel. Grimjo snarled, and Ichigo promptly burst into tears. Stop that right now. Grimjo screamed, now half panicked. Everyone said there was candy if I broke that thing and then Fish Tank crushed it and you're being mean. Ichigo declared amidst his sobs. I want my mommy. Before that moment Grimjo would have welcomed those words. Spoken in this manner though, he wouldn't survive long enough to get out of the room before he'd be attacked by Halibel. He needed to reconsider. Fine. I'll get you some candy, just stop crying. The speed that Ichigo's eyes dried made Grimjo feel as though he might be getting hoodwinked. Considering where he now stood, Grimjo seriously considered whether it might be worth it to try to endure Halibel's wrath if just to avoid where he was about to go. This was the only place in Las Noches though that might have some candy, especially since Aizen had had the kitchens cleaned out after Jin's debacle in them. Here he stood, about to enter the 9th circle of hell, the gateway to misery and perversity, the horrific arena where demons gathered and planned the downfall and torture of all that surrounded them. Also known as Jin's room. Let's go. Uncle Jin always has candy. Ichigo declared excitedly as he reached out and grabbed the door handle, disappearing into the demon's lair without hesitation. Like hell Grimjo was going to be shown up by a child. He quickly stuck his back to the wall and slid into the room, Pantera drawn to ward off any evil that he may find there. He was very relieved that the only person he saw was the brat, and said brat was tearing through Jin's drawer. Hey! Grimjo growled as he jumped over to where the kid was carelessly tossing shirts and pants. Try to not mess anything up. We don't want him knowing that we were here. The orange-haired child ignored him as he finished searching the drawers and skipped over to the closet, not bothering to pick anything up. Grimjo stared at the disaster that was left and started grabbing various items, shoving them back into the drawers, and then attempting to close said drawers. There were lots of various items that still poked out, but at least the room didn't look like a tornado had rampaged through it. Turning, the blue-haired man felt his jaw drop as the closet came into view. The brat was climbing over boxes, shelves, yanking various items down, clothes pulled off of hangers, and the pile was flooding out the door of the closet. As Grimjo rushed over, the orange terror jumped out and headed elsewhere as Grimjo attempted to put some order to the closet. He quickly gave up after a shelf collapsed, scattering the boxes he had shoved onto it. In the end he jumped out of the closet and shoveled everything into the confines of the closet and somehow was able to force the door closed. Turning to see what he would have to deal with now, Grimjo really did scream when he realized that while his back was turned the brat had raided Jin's underwear drawer. They were everywhere, the floor, the bed, the tabletop, one had even gotten hooked on the light fixture. Grimjo raced around the room, grabbing the horrific white but bags up, and right as he thought he got the last one, he realized something. He hadn't seen Ichigo since he had come out of the closet. Brat, he called as he peeked under the bed, behind the chairs and sofa, and finally entered the bathroom. There was no sign of the kid anywhere. Grimjo was just exiting the bathroom when the main door opened, revealing the White Devil himself, Jin. Grimjo froze in his shock and horror as he noticed something of rather extreme importance that he had forgotten to do. And that just made it all the worse. Jin grinned viciously as he approached Grimjo, making the Arrancar swear all the worse. Grimmy! What a pleasant surprise. Halibel and I just ran into Ichigo, who told us you were kind enough to get him some candy since Araniro destroyed the candy Aizen gave him. That was very nice of you. Jin stopped right in front of the blue-haired Espada, and his grin, if possible, became even more snake-like. Now, would you please explain why you are trying to make off with all of my underwear? Saria, finally, another chapter. Tori, and once more, time for a vote. Zas, since this was Grimjo, that means that you can vote for any of the following: Yami, Araniro, Sayel, Zamari, Noitora, Ulquiorra, Halibel, Baragon, Stark, Aizen, Jin, and Chusen. Essay, so, since you've read, pulls out a missile launcher, you'll now review if you wish to live. Where ha 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 ha. Tori, I thought she was emo. Zas, no, just insane. Saria, hey! I'm the insane one. Chapter 14, Quattro Break. Saria, why is it that right when I think I'm settled, something happens? Tori, come again? Zas, she means right after we finish unpacking the last of the moving boxes, it seems we are moving. Again? Tori, what? Essay, stop it, both of you. That's one of the downfalls of the career that Saria chose. I have just one question though. Saria, and what would that be? Essay, well, I know you weren't that fond of your current workplace, so before we leave. Pulls out a bazooka, may I please blow up that dusty old hangar? Ichigo skipped up the hall, grinning as he popped random pieces of candy into his mouth, wondering if he might run into Lillinette. He knew that Lily liked candy too, and Stark wasn't a bad guy either. So maybe he should share some of this treasure with them. Turning a corner, Ichigo almost dropped the candy he was carrying when he ran into the ultimate party pooper, the biggest killjoy in existence, the only person who could take all the fun out of an amusement park. He also went by the name of Ulquiorra. The pale man looked less than pleased about Ichigo running into him. His displeasure became more apparent when he noticed the candy. He didn't give any warning before he snatched the sweets from the child, determined to not allow the child to get sugar high. He was a terror enough as he was. These are terrible for you, Ulquiorra said monotonously as he dumped the sweets down the nearest garbage chute, ignoring the glare he got from the boy. For his part, Ichigo already knew this about Ulquiorra: don't bother crying, he won't react. He was just going to have to wait for a sympathetic ear, and as he glanced up the hall, a slight smirk played across his features, one that was not missed by Ulquiorra. Glancing in the same direction, Ulquiorra felt an almost smirk play at the edges of his lips. Grimjo, who was carrying an armload of undergarments, was being chased up the hall by Jin, who was sporting a malicious grin of his own. It seemed like one of those moments that humans referred to as Kodak moments. But there were other things he felt a need to attend to. Come Ichigo, we are going to be going over etiquette and grammar, Ulquiorra stated as he turned to march down the hall. Behind Ulquiorra, Ichigo hadn't moved at all aside from pulling a face before his eyes alighted back to Jin, who in turn had just noticed Ichigo at the corner. Remember Grimjo, you are to wash those then put them back in my drawers. Jin yelled after the retreating blue-haired Arrancar, who seemed to be attempting to break the sound barrier. The sly man then ambled over towards Ulquiorra and Ichigo, his trademark grin in place. Ichigo grinned up at his favorite uncle. Ulquiorra was tempted to hide, but chose to ignore what his instincts told him to do in favor of trying to fulfill his duty. What might I ask were you doing with Grimjo? The pale Arrancar asked. Somehow, Jin's grin grew wider. I caught Grimjo in the midst of raiding my underwear drawer. He was either looking for candy, or he has a serious FTSH that needs to be addressed. Ulquiorra immediately remembered the candy Ichigo had been devouring when he ran into him. Internally he winced and wiped his hands on the material inside his pockets. He'd have these clothes burned later. I see. If you'll pardon us, Jin-sama, I will be taking Ichigo for his daily lesson. What will you be addressing? Jin asked, his typical grin becoming more conniving right in front of Ulquiorra's eyes. Manners, Ulquiorra replied immediately, hoping to deter Jin by naming the one thing to immediately come to mind that should be near impossible to mess up. and that should hold no interest with the fox-faced man. All right, I'll join you. DMN. Might I suggest starting with table manners? Ulquiorra should have known to expect this from Jin when he wanted to work on table manners. This had nothing to do with manners. This was chaos, pure and simple. It also went by the name of Chuck E. Cheese, a child-themed pier restaurant in the human world. Poe was the only one at the table with him, and the tall male seemed very confused. Coolhorn and Dordoni were playing some strange game where they were jumping on arrows in combinations. He believed it was called the Dance Revolution. Dordoni was earnestly playing. Coolhorn, on the other hand, was attempting to pose while playing and had thus far caused about 6 visits from paramedics as people went into convulsions. Avirama was screaming "kill, kill, kill" as he played something called Whack-A-Mole and looked to be only seconds away from pulling out his Zanbakuto. Jijo, Nerga, Finder, and Lilinette were on some sort of racing game, and the males were losing spectacularly. He had no idea where Jin and Ichigo were, and part of him didn't want to know. All around him, little hooligans ran rampant, and he saw more than one set of exhausted-looking parents looking a little hopeless. Great, now he was starting to feel a connection with humans. Suddenly, the loudspeaker gave a faint squawk and all adult heads, or at least ones that he didn't know the names of, turned toward the ceiling. They were about to make an announcement, and Ulquiorra had been there just long enough to know that this either meant one of those horrifying shows involving a human in a trashy mouse suit, or an order was being filled. "Party of Arrancar, your order is being delivered to your table," the chirpy voice called. Several of the adults at other tables groaned, realizing that they were still stuck in this limbo without an end in sight. Others showed honest relief on their faces, obviously preferring this to another loud, nerve-wracking performance set up by the mascot of this hellish establishment. Moments later, the table was crowded as the various Arrancar and Shinigami appeared and took their seats as their beer and beverages were served. Ulquiorra found himself smashed between Poe and Coolhorn. Across the table, he caught sight of Jin grinning in a particularly vicious manner, and it caused him to do something even having Coolhorn so close had failed to do. He shuddered and felt dread begin to build in his stomach. Nothing happened right away though. The group ate the terrible beer that they were served without complaint. The sugary drinks helped wash down the greasy feeling it left in Ulquiorra's mouth. It was so close to finally being over. Ulquiorra could see the end coming. There was their waitress right now, in fact. They could pay the tab and leave. But why was she smiling like that? What was with the group behind her? "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a spectacular birthday today," a voice declared over the pager. "Oh hell. What a nice big brother you are, to come here on your birthday because your little brother likes it so much," the waitress chirped with a big smile. Ulquiorra felt the twitching start to get worse, and his stomach was openly rebelling. Then the cake was plopped down in front of him and the group of waiters and waitresses began to sing. Aizen stared at the report that Sayel had sent to him and couldn't stop a sigh. Truly, to have a complete nervous breakdown? He had obviously been working Ulquiorra too strong. He did easily shoulder about 3 times the workload that the other beings under his command did, but he should have insisted upon the Quattro taking a break, even if just for a few days. What confused him though were the symptoms of the breakdown. Why was Ulquiorra screaming about cake and making the tone-deaf harpies shut up? Saria, yay! Time for a new vote. Whom shall be my next victim? Essay, next victim, the hanger. Zas, some reason I doubt that. Tori, we don't have any food again. Saria, Zas. Did you pig out while I was trying to write?